Well, hello everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you happen to be. Welcome to this seminar, this webinar session on the NEC4 Alliance Contract consultation draft. It's been produced by two of us. I'm Peter Higgins. Thank you. We're having a little bit of trouble with the technology here, but we're getting around it. Yeah, we're sorting it out. I'm Peter Higgins. I'm the chairman of the group leading the NEC4 drafting, the NEC4 board, and Ian is a key member of that board and has been involved very heavily in leading the team doing the drafting of the Alliance contract. So between us we will try to explain what's happening with the contract and go through the various points that might come up, and also dealing with any questions that you guys out there might raise with us. We'll pick up questions as we go through and try and answer them. At the end of the session, perhaps we'll pick up any that's left and deal with them in a different way. Just to deal with the agenda, what we're going to do is deal with a few points that Ian and I will try and take you through. First of all, why an alliance contract? What are we doing? Why have we produced it? What does it mean under the NEC family and style of things? And then a few detailed points about the alliance contract itself. We'll close with a session on the consultation process and deal with questions and answers. So first of all, Ian, can you explain why we got an alliance contract in the first place? What does it mean? How does it fit with the NEC system?
Okay, there's been a lot of there's increasing pressure, I think, on all members of the supply chain, clients themselves, to improve performance, looking at better ways of delivering projects, avoiding problems and disputes, trying to focus the minds of the team to deliver on time, on budget, increasing value. And many people see collaboration as a way of achieving this, that by creating greater integration, getting the parties to work together, as opposed to pulling in different directions, all pulling in the same direction, that's going to help achieve those improved performance aims. And what we see is that many traditional contracts form a barrier to that collaboration. They seem to create, risk and liabilities allocated to individual parties, that the parties are then trying to avoid or reduce or move around the supply chain, possibly unnecessarily or incorrectly to different tiers of the supply chain. And also, people don't have the same objectives commonly. Some people want to increase their turnover, some people may want to look to have reasons to claim variations or compensation events. And by trying to avoid those issues, trying to create reduced risk or shared risk, aligning objectives, everyone's pulling together to achieve the same overall aims that suit what the client's looking for, we think it will lead to improved performance. So it's trying to create a contract and an environment to allow that to happen, to remove those barriers. Absolutely, it is that collaboration, everyone pulling in the same direction rather than looking after their own self-interest, which a lot of existing sort of bi-party contracts tend to encourage, or certainly don't facilitate this collaboration in the right way.
Okay. So how is that done? Any particular points on that one? I mean, the key point, it seems to me, is that the NEC has always been thought of as a collaborative contract. We're encouraging working together, achieving client objectives. How is the alliance contract different?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, NEC throughout its history has always supported collaboration. We had the old 10.1, now 10.2 in NEC4, which looks at requires the parties to work together in a spirit of mutual trust and cooperation, absolutely. And so that cooperation is key. It's collaborating, it's working together. But in fairness, it's only ever been a bi-party arrangement, and that 10.2 only, if you like, exists in the contract between the parties. And in fairness, NEC has tried to expand that into the wider supply chain, firstly by creating a series of contracts that allow all of the members of the supply chain to be engaged under similar terms and conditions, all of which contain that 10.2 requirement of.
And we've expanded that in the new NEC4 by providing some more subcontracts as well.
That's right, yeah, we have the professional services subcontract and the term services subcontract now. So trying to have all of the members of the supply chain engaged under similar contracts, NEC contracts, that feature this requirement for mutual trust and cooperation.
Yeah.
So there's always been a history of cooperation in the contract, a driver for that, and that was reinforced with the introduction of X12. X12 again only applies on a bi-party basis, but with every contract that features X12, it allows members of those contracts to be pulled together into a core team, where those individual members of the supply chain then work together to achieve a shared set of objectives as laid out in X12, and they have rewards, incentives against those. And
also they need to work together because they are going to give extra warnings and assistance to each other to achieve those.
Yeah.
So they are greater collaboration in that case.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is another step beyond the standard. So we have 10.2 mutual trust cooperation, a requirement there to cooperate.
Yes.
X12 overlays that again with this requirement for different contracts and different parties to come together in the core team, achieving shared objectives, as you say, raising early warnings, giving advice and assistance to each other. But still, in fairness, that only applies into the individual contracts, and those contracts still have their own performance objectives, their own liabilities, their own obligations, individual maybe performance targets within those contracts, as well as the overriding or overarching X12.
But that's also been expanded a little bit further, hasn't it, with the Infrastructure Client Group Code of Practice on alliancing, where we produced guidance on that, which does a little bit more in terms of providing extra incentives and motivations.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Infrastructure Client Group produced their guide to alliancing. You and I have worked with them in terms of producing a guide on how you can use NEC contracts to achieve or create an alliance with X12, overarching it. And I think it's sort of X12 plus in the sense of it's not just the X12 as produced. We've also suggested some changes to be made, possible Z clauses that would allow the standard contracts to better accommodate an overarching alliance arrangement.
Okay.
So in some ways, you possibly have almost like 3 or 4 tiers of alliancing. You have the 10.2 requirement in every contract to collaborate, creating a level of collaboration. We then have X12, which can overlay that and create another level of collaboration with shared objectives, shared targets. We then have X12 with some further guidance around implementing aligned contracts using NEC, with some, I say, additional Z clauses suggested and ways of creating the right partnering information. And then ultimately, even with those, there was still like pressure from users, there was still feedback from industry that they wanted something more. They wanted what some people may refer to as a true alliance contract, which is a single contract to which everybody, the clients and all of their supply chain members or key supply chain members sign up to.
So it's a distinction. It's not that they all have the same contract, but they all sign up to a single contract. It's a true multi-party contract.
Absolutely. It's not the bi-party contract that people may be familiar with, NEC contracts. It's a true multi-party contract. It is a single contract. They are all signing up to it in terms of their names and the contract data and the form of agreement, and they are all then bound by that contract.
Okay. Okay. Well, we can see how that works in a bit of detail. Can you sort of give us some key points behind this?
Okay, so in terms of the way we've approached producing the alliance contract, as you may expect, we've started with the existing NEC3, now NEC4 contracts, and use those as a basis. Clearly, there seems to be a lot of industry feedback that they like the NEC style and processes, the stimulus to good management, simple language, etc. And we've continued that into the alliance contract. So wherever possible, we followed the structure, used the same terminology, the same clauses and wording where we can to get familiarity and consistency between the alliance contract and the existing NEC4 contracts. Though we do have to reflect it is different. It is a multi-party contract, as we've explained. So there has to be changes to reflect that. And also, the fundamental nature of this contract is that we are going to have a series of performance objectives against which the alliance is going to be targeted to achieve. And if they achieve those, they will be rewarded. And conversely, if they don't, they may suffer a reduction in return. But it's the whole team, client and all of their partners working together to achieve these shared objectives, this performance criteria laid out by the client.
So the client's setting out something that says, this is what I want to achieve, and this is how we'll give you extra benefits for achieving it. So you're all trying to earn something out of the alliance.
Yeah, it comes back to the earlier slide. It's about aligning objectives. It's getting the parties to work together to try and achieve these shared objectives. And at the same stage, they will also be sharing in risks or certainly liabilities, which we'll talk about shortly.
Okay, so how could it be used then? Is it for a big scheme, small scheme, lots of schemes? What stage does the contractor get involved?
Okay, the contract we feel is going to be more applicable to larger projects, perhaps more complicated projects or programs of work. So it could be used on a program of work, not just individual projects, but there's going to be a time and investment in creating the alliance and getting it set up, getting the members and the partners on board. So that would, suggest it's going to be used for, say, more complex, larger projects or programs than smaller value schemes where maybe X12 or just even the standard contracts with 10.2 could hopefully achieve something similar. It's also designed to be used on a single and two-stage basis. So there are provisions in there to allow you to have a two-stage process whereby you engage the alliance, they undertake an element of stage one work to develop the scope, look at programs, look at the budget for the remaining works, and hopefully if that can then be agreed with the clients, you move to the next stage.
Okay.
If you can't, there's a break point and it can be drawn to an end at that point in time.
Fine. Okay, that's fairly straightforward. Can you take us through a few of the details then, Ian?
Okay, so in terms of the actual structure of the contract itself, it's based on a single main option, so we don't have a choice of main options. The view being that we feel that alliance primarily should be a cost reimbursable contract, albeit with a performance overlay that we'll discuss later. So it's an option E, cost reimbursable, defined cost plus fee based contract. And in terms of secondary options, we thought very carefully about these, looking that a lot of these secondary options deal with allocation of liability, they deal with responsibility for various issues, which actually, given we're trying to reduce liabilities or reduce the allocation of risk between parties or share them, a lot of them were felt to be unnecessary.
Sure.
So we've got a limited number of secondary options. We've got X2 changing the law, ultimate holding company guarantee, X9 transfer of rights, X10 information modelling, which we've left as a secondary option because even though we think it will be very common, those situations where a client doesn't want to use it or maybe wants their own specific version. X18 limitation of liability is also included, but interestingly there we're looking at that being the cumulative liability of all the partners. So if you add a partner, it doesn't increase the overall liability.
So it's not the individual partner's liability, it's the totality.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And again, it's that idea that the parties are sharing these risks, these liabilities, therefore they share that limitation amongst them.
Okay.
Okay, and then we've got YUK2 and YUK3 to take into account requirements of UK legislation if the alliance is going to be used in the UK. But as with all NEC contracts, it's designed for international use, so there's no reason why those have to be used. It's only when they're required by statute.
Or particular requirements where you want to use the Third Party Rights Act, yes. Okay.
Okay, in terms of other secondary options, some of these we've brought into the core clauses. The view was that these shouldn't be an option because they will be needed on each and every alliance contract. So as you may expect, X12 multi-party collaboration,
yes.
The key elements of that have been brought into core, or if they're not in core, they're no longer needed because they're covered by other aspects of the contract. X15 contractors design, that's been brought into core. Again, the view being that you're creating an alliance to undertake a whole range of activities which will probably include design, therefore you would want to have that as part of the core as an option. And again, particularly if you've got a two-stage contract, certainly there's going to be a major design element as part of the alliance function. We then also have X17 and X20, low performance damages and key performance indicators. Those have been brought into core and subsumed into a performance table, which is a process or a document that is used to target the performance of the alliance against the client's alliance objectives and against which performance will be measured.
Right. We're going to cover that a little bit later in another slide, aren't we?
We'll cover that in some more detail shortly.
Sure.
And then in terms of the contract data, we have a single contract data. So unlike...
That's a novelty then for NEC.
Yeah.
You don't have a part 1 and part 2.
No, we don't. So we just have a single contract data, the view being that unlike maybe more traditional NEC contracts where the client would issue out a contract data part 1, contractor will return a contract data part 2, possibly in a competitive environment. Here, we've got a situation where the alliance is going to be created by mutual consent almost. There may be some sort of tendering process to select the members of the alliance, but the actual formation of the alliance requires the parties to agree the common base on which they're going to start.
Yes, they must all agree together, agree each other. The whole team has to agree, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're going to have a situation where you're going to force partners into this alliance and make them work, that's not really going to achieve the collaboration you want. There has to be this ability for the team to come together, to coalesce, to agree that contract data, what they're all signing up to, which they're all then going to work to achieve.
Okay. And you can change these partners?
Yeah, there's flexibility. Partners can be added, they can be removed. There's limited grounds for removal, part of the termination process. But partners can be added and they can change as required over time.
Okay. So how do we deal with what responsibilities they have for the members of the alliance then?
Okay, I mean, one of the key things that we've identified, and goes back again to one of the earlier slides, is that a barrier to collaboration is when parties have a risk allocation or liabilities allocated to them, distinct to another party. And then a lot of effort goes into protecting their position, trying to avoid them being liable for an event if it occurs. And also, you know, when an event does occur, there's lots of finger pointing.
Who's going to carry the can?
Exactly, it's not my fault, it's your fault, etc. So what we've got here is a fundamental overriding part of the contract, is that wherever possible, liabilities are shared and managed by the alliance. You know, the idea being that, you know, there should be virtually no liabilities that sit outside of the alliance and is borne by one party or the other. There's only two we specifically identified at the moment that sit outside of the alliance or are not shared by all of the alliance members together, which is willful default of a partner.
Okay.
Which I think you would possibly expect in the idea that if one person, you know, goes against the contract, does something that is so against what the contract requires, that they should be held liable or be responsible for that eventuality.
The consequences,
And then we have third-party claims. Now, third-party claims in the current wording, it's obviously a consultative document, and we're looking for feedback from the users in terms of how they think it operates or how it should operate. So what we're saying is that third-party claims are borne by the client. So the client will pick up the cost of those, responsible for dealing with those, albeit they can actually include the cost that they pay out as part of the cost of the alliance.
So the alliance members get motivated to minimise on third-party claims anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're not making the cost directly, but they're going to contribute towards the cost through their target share bonus.
That's it, exactly. They're not going to pay out money. They're not going to, you know, suffer a reduction in defined cost, or they're not going to have to pay to third parties directly. The client will deal with it, but the costs incurred become costs of the alliance, offset against the budget, and therefore may impact on any gain share, pain share, performance reward they receive.
So the client will identify how much he expects to pay in terms of third-party liabilities, and the alliance team members will gain a benefit if we end up having less claims on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's very much about, you know, this shared performance, the idea that, it's not just the performance of the partners, but also the client's performance that the partners are sharing, and the client's risk that the partners can share some consequence for through these sorts of provisions.
Okay. And insurance side?
Yeah, insurance, we're looking at joint names insurance for all members of the alliance. The default position is that the client will provide the insurances, which I think reflects probably large-scale projects that have been done in a number of parts of the world now, where the client provides the insurance because it seems to be a better value way of doing it, albeit that can be flexed in the contract data. And with everything, we look for feedback from the users and the insurance market around this. And interestingly, we've also got professional indemnity insurance being provided by the client for all partners. And again, there's been some debate around that. Is that the appropriate way to go? And so again, very much through the consultation process, we're looking for feedback. Is that acceptable to the market? Is it, you know, the most beneficial, cost-effective way to proceed? Or are there other ways to deal with this? But what we don't want to do is have a situation of lots of different insurance policies, and again, so many people pointing the finger, it's not my insurance, it's your insurance, or insurance companies wanting to step in and take forward actions against other members of the alliance. That's exactly what we don't want to happen.
That's right. It's got to be a joint enterprise, not individual people trying to do their own thing. And minimise their own liability.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that's why we're saying client-provided insurance, including PII. The only insurance that the individual partners will provide is employer's liability. So that will remain an individual insurance provided by each company.
Okay, that's helpful. Do you want to just take us through the structure, how this is all set apart and set out in the contract?
Okay, well, when we try to pull the contract together, we tried not to be too restrictive and, if you like, impose too rigid a structure. We have got a structure in there, but we allow flexibility in terms of how the Alliance actually organises itself within the overriding structure. Okay. So, key thing is Alliance has to provide the works in accordance with the scope and the Alliance objectives, so what the client has set out as their objectives for the Alliance. Yep. And the members of the Alliance work together as an integrated team. And it's very much then for the Alliance to determine who's best placed to do what.
Yeah, this is different from a joint venture type working, isn't it?
Yeah, but very much so. I mean, a joint venture, that tends to be where, you know, individuals come together. Often you have a joint venture and the client separate to it. But even within the joint venture, people have their roles or their presets, activities, and therefore, you know, whether it's right or wrong or whether it should change afterwards, people are fairly rigid in what they've signed up to do and what their contribution will be.
Sure. And this will try to encourage people to choose the right people, the right resources for any particular task based on what we have available and which is going to be the most efficient way of dealing with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, if we say this work will be done by a particular contractor within the Alliance and they have a lack of resource and there's some with resource available, maybe you can shuffle the work around. Maybe someone's doing a piece of work very efficiently and you give them more of that same work, possibly moving to somebody else. But no one should care in that situation because as the Alliance improves and performs better, everybody shares in the rewards.
Yes.
So again, it's coming back to the idea of it's not individual company drivers, that's my bit of work, I want this turnover. It's what's best for the Alliance is best for me, therefore I'm happy to flex allocation of work, selection of individuals based on ability.
Okay, yeah, that's good overview.
Okay, so key thing we're trying to achieve through the process, what we have in terms of the organisation of the Alliance is we have an Alliance board, and that is really the body that runs the Alliance. The Alliance board is made up of representatives of all members of the Alliance, including the client. Yeah. Yeah. So this board, everybody's in the Alliance forms part of that board, if you like, each with an equal voting right, and all decisions of that board have to be unanimous. So this, you know, requires the client to engage in that process, to accept that there are certain decisions that they are going to now share with the Alliance board, but it creates this ability for the Alliance to manage it as a team and on a best for Alliance basis.
Yeah, so the whole team comes together to make these decisions rather than simply having the client impose it.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll talk about certain client reserved matters later. Yep. There are certain things the client has retained the power to make decisions on, but the vast majority of decisions are with the Alliance. Okay. Because they're the ones who are, you know, you want to be responsible for delivery, for making the decisions on a best for the whole Alliance basis. Okay. And all decisions of the Alliance board bind all members of the Alliance.
Fine, thanks.
Okay, some further details on the structure of it. We have an Alliance manager, and the Alliance manager leads the Alliance delivery team and undertakes actually many of the functions that are normally split between contractor and project manager under, say, the ECC. So a lot of these activities now rolled into one person, reflecting this collaborative nature, in some ways removing the boundaries or barriers in the ECC between contractor and client, because we've pulled these activities into the Alliance.
So it's a bit more than just the project manager type role, it's different from that. Who appoints the Alliance manager? How is he identified?
The Alliance manager is appointed by the Alliance board, and they can obviously replace or change that Alliance manager if they choose to do so. And it's there's no sort of guidance in terms of who that person should be. It's who the Alliance board thinks is most appropriate to run the Alliance. It could be someone from the client's team, someone from one of the partners. It could even be, you know, a third party that is brought in and engaged by one of the partners or the client to undertake that function.
Okay.
And the key thing is that, you know, they need to, I guess, command the respect of the members of the Alliance and be able to undertake what, you know, what is going to be a fairly challenging task, undertaking functions of both project manager and contractor under the ECC.
Okay.
Okay, so, you know, they will deal with things that, as I say, normally are split out between different parties. So looking at programme, quality, assessing the amount due, dealing with compensation events. Report to the Alliance board, and so ultimately that's who they're responsible to and answerable to, as opposed to the clients specifically. They report to the Alliance board. But then we do have something called, or someone called, the client's representative.
Yeah, because the client is a member of the alliance, but there are certain things the client does which others don't. For example, only the client is going to make payment.
Yeah.
But there's a number of other things as well. I think the client's reserved for himself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting because the client in some ways has a dual role in the alliance contract. Yeah. They sit as a member of the alliance. They are just one of the alliance board. They are making decisions as part of the alliance, work allocation, selecting people for certain roles and functions.
Yep. Yep.
But then they have a role outside of the alliance as the client, making payments, maybe making certain decisions about acceptance of design, or proceeding to stage 2 under an ECI process, and or maybe changing the scope, adding work, removing work. So there are certain like reserved matters that sit with the client outside of the role of the client as part of the alliance. Okay, in terms of payments, the basis I've already said is an option E, so it's a cost reimbursable contract, payment based on defined cost plus fee. So we have a schedule of cost components, actually very similar to the ECC schedule of cost components, with the preconception being that most of the alliance members will be in a shared facility, co-located, and therefore that will be in effect the working area in which costs will be incurred in accordance with the schedule.
But presumably they don't all have to be there. It allows for people outside of those areas.
Yeah, it does. We still have provisions for manufacture and fabrication outside the working area and design outside the working area. Sure. And again, an issue for the consultation is whether there's a view that whether we should bring in any of the provisions of the professional services contract schedule of cost components for if there's large amounts of design being done in a consultant's office as opposed to within the co-located facility. Okay. Should we deal with that on a schedule of rates basis as per the ECC, you know, in terms of how you deal with design outside the working area, or should we go to a true actual cost?
Yep.
So again, feedback on that is going to be welcomed as part of the consultation process. We have disallowed cost, but we have an extremely limited amount of disallowed cost. There's only 2 that remain, and they are really only where the cost cannot be justified. You know, again, it comes back to the sharing of risk with the client now, sharing in risk around disallowance of cost. Okay, and each partner sharing in each other's risk around this.
Trying to avoid disallowed cost.
Absolutely, it's in nobody's interest to have disallowed cost because everybody, if you like, suffers in the same way in reduced performance payments. We have a project bank account as the basis for making payments. So the alliance creates a project bank account. Payment, as you said, only comes from the client to the alliance or to the partners in the alliance. And then once it's received the project bank, it's paid out to named suppliers, so subcontractors, sub-suppliers if they are named, and or out to the partners themselves.
Okay, good.
Okay, and it's for the alliance manager to assess the amount due, and the client's rep has a function to check it and maybe question it, but it's not the same as a traditional, you know, assessment and then checked and final decision on payment made by the client. It's really for the alliance to determine the amount, with the client having a rep having a checking function around that.
It's almost like an audit.
Yeah, very similar.
Okay, and the payment can include incentives payments, of course.
Yeah, and incentives, again, is a fundamental part of the contract. Mentioned already, it's a performance-based contract. It lends an element from the DBO contract around how you deal with some of these issues. So we have a performance table created by the client based on their alliance objectives, against which the client will identify certain performance targets to be achieved. If those are achieved or bettered, there'll be an increased return to the partners. If they're not achieved, there'll be a reduced return.
Okay. I mean, the intention there is that the client starts off by saying what they want to achieve with the alliance. They're the alliance objectives. The performance table is basically measuring whether or not those objectives have been achieved.
Yeah,
that's the idea.
Yes.
And then the approach is going to be that the alliance members will make their return by achieving those objectives, rather than by simply having turnover.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and there can be a range of things that the client wants to target around that. And I think one of the fundamental premises we have as well is that the payment of these incentives is made against savings. So savings achieved by the alliance against the budget. So there is a financial start point, which is have savings been created, and then those savings are distributed in accordance with the performance table. And also, if a saving hasn't been made, there may be some sort of costs paid by the Alliance members if they fail to achieve some of these key targets.
So the starting point is that if you've not managed to achieve savings on the budget, you can't recover any benefits from achieving targets elsewhere, other targets.
Yeah, that it's self-funding against the premise. And again, we welcome feedback on whether that's the right approach. That's the feedback we've received so far. That's what people want to see. But again, interestingly, whether that is the view felt by the rest of the industry when they have a look at the contract.
There's always a problem, isn't there, where the client's got a budget and then is paying incentives out, but in order to pay the incentives, he's got to go back to the board and ask for an increase in the budget.
Yeah. So
I've spent more, position to
I've spent more than I thought I would already, and by the way, I'm now going to reward the partners
for doing a good job.
Yeah. So clearly, that's not going to be maybe palatable to some clients. So that's why that made it self-funding.
Okay.
And I think just one other point to mention in respect of this issue is that client costs, as we've already said, can form part of the Alliance budget and also a part of the Alliance cost, the total price for work done today. So, the client can bring their costs into this calculation, encouraging obviously the partners then to try and reduce the client's costs, because they will maybe suffer a reduced return if they go up.
That's okay then. So how do you deal with the change then? Because things do happen, you do get changes from time to time.
So we do have compensation events under this contract, and we have a similar process to other NEC contracts in how this is dealt with. What we do have though is a much greater reduction in the number of compensation events. There are a very limited number of grounds for compensation events, and if you have a compensation event, it can increase the budget, it can affect the performance table, so certain performance targets may be altered or reset, and also it can extend the contract period, it can change the completion date. In terms of the process around it, again, reflecting the nature of the Alliance, it's the Alliance manager who assesses the compensation events, who produces the quotations, and it's the Alliance board who then reviews that and accepts it.
Not the client by themselves. Not
the client. The client doesn't have a distinct role in this, but of course, the client is part of the Alliance board. They have a vote, as do the others. So if they don't believe the quotation has been put together properly, there's errors in it, or they're not happy with elements of it, they can, as the Alliance board, veto it, for want of a better word. They can say, not happy, we need to revise it. And obviously, once the Alliance board's happy, the client's happy, why have a further acceptance process? The client's already said they're happy by, as the Alliance board member, agreeing to put it forward.
Okay. So you deal with those changes by changing what, the performance table?
Well, say it can make changes to the performance table, it could increase the budget or reduce the budget if work's being removed, and then it can also change the completion date. So it's, time, it's cost, and to an extent, not so much quality, but objectives around performance in the performance table.
Yeah, so basically it's mainly the performance table that's going to be changed then, isn't it? Because your budget is probably going to form part of the performance table with a saving on that, and similarly if time is important, that would go there in the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. And, again, under this contract, there are no things such as delay damages, we don't have bonuses for early completion, those will be built into the performance table.
Now, just a puzzling point on this one, if you're saying that all decisions have got to be unanimous, everyone has to agree, what is it then?
Okay, well, again, it's something we have thought long and hard about, and what we've decided is we're going to have a sort of a no blame, no claim culture under this contract. It comes back to, it's a collaborative contract. The whole ethos of it is the parties work together, that they're going to make mutual decisions in the best interest of the Alliance. So we don't have any provisions in the contract to go to any sort of formal dispute resolution process. Disputes, disagreements have to be dealt with and resolved within the Alliance. So the starting point is we can refer matters to senior representatives of the parties who are at disagreements, or the members of the Alliance who are in disagreements. If they can't resolve it, it goes to the Alliance board, and the Alliance board have to resolve it. It is as simple as that. Contractually, they have to bring the matter to a conclusion. Now, in fairness, they can use any process to do so. They can go and get an opinion from a third party. They can get an auditor to come in and audit costs, or look at technical matter, technical expert to give a view. But ultimately, the Alliance board has to determine the issue, because if they can't, then can the Alliance still function if we have a dispute at the core of it?
Okay, so they can bring in a conciliator, mediator, or any process they like to try and help them, but they've got to keep going until they reach agreement.
Yeah.
Or close the job down?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, ultimately, if the members of the Alliance can't resolve the issue, then the only recourse really would be to bring the Alliance to a conclusion, or possibly ask that member of the Alliance to step away and replace them. Mm. Because, you know, if you are, you know, banging heads, you can't agree a matter, you know, suddenly the whole basis of this contract about working together, having that collaborative approach has gone. So it's just to say, okay, we've fallen out, you don't like what I'm doing, but you must carry on, and by the way, still agree with all my decisions, we must work collaboratively together, isn't really going to work.
No. And that was, I think, the reason why we got no provision there for adjudication or any other dispute process.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you know, that again, there's already been some feedback around this, and some concerns may be raised. I mean, obviously, we can't exclude, you know, statutory rights to such activities. And certainly in some countries, UK, etc., there is the ability to go to adjudication, and that can't be excluded, that remains. But what we're saying is that if you get into that stage and you're going to go to a third party to enforce a decision, again, it suggests that the Alliance isn't working, and you know, really, what could they enforce as a decision anyway?
Yes, if you go to an adjudicator, the adjudicator gives a decision. If in fact everybody's happy with that, then that's the same as the process you just mentioned about getting some third-party support to the board. So the board says, yes, we're quite happy with what the adjudicator is. But if the board says, or some parts of the board says, no, we're not at all happy with what the adjudicator says, you're back to where you started. You've got to find a resolution for that. We cannot continue.
Yeah. You know, what we're saying is that, as you pointed out there, you can, you know, in effect, have adjudication as part of the third-party support to the Alliance board. So the Alliance board could say, we can't agree, let's go to an independent third party, call them adjudicator, call them what you will, get them to come in and give a recommendation. But it will be a recommendation as opposed to a contractually binding decision. Because if recommendations made, everybody's happy, as you said, Peter, Alliance gives effect to it, the matter's brought to a conclusion, we carry on. But if a recommendation's made and you don't like it, just having the ability to contractually enforce it doesn't really resolve the issue of you have a problem in the Alliance, you have disagreements over a decision made, somebody's not happy, they're either going to want to leave the Alliance or possibly then bring the Alliance to a conclusion. Sure. They're not going to carry on if they're, you know, disagreeing with and are not happy with decisions made.
So basically what we're saying is that a final and binding decision by somebody outside the Alliance doesn't help the Alliance to achieve its objectives, and therefore we've made no provision for it happening. Yeah. Instead, if you reach a stage where you cannot resolve it, then you do need to go and consider whether or not the Alliance continues, or if in fact it's just one member who feels unhappy to continue, then that member is probably best if they leave.
Yeah, I mean, you can give different equivalents to this in different ways, but you imagine an old-style partnership in an organisation, and you have a number of partners who decide to come together to work as a partnership, make decisions for the common good, and to move forward. If one of those partners then falls out with the others, or you know, you can't get agreement on certain matters, you know, the partnership then would naturally come to an end. That partner would leave, or the partnership would be dissolved. It's not so dissimilar here. That the starting point of this whole arrangement is collaborative, working together, don't blame each other, all for the common good, and that's what we're trying to achieve. If somebody falls out, getting a third party to enforce a decision that you don't like and you appeal through the courts, it just doesn't work.
No, let's just leave it there. Let's not spend too much time on something which doesn't really happen much, because we don't get we're not going to have any big disputes on this contract, are we? And if they are, then the contract's caused a bit of a problem. Working together doesn't seem to work, so let's not spend more time on that. Let's move on to the consultation process. I think we've given a bit of a feed now as to what's involved in the contract, how it runs, and part of the purpose of this process was also to help people out here to decide whether or not they think they can make a useful contribution to the consultation process. So the process is this. The contract itself can be downloaded. The process is that you need to register with NEC. They will then give you a key to download a copy of the contract for a period of time to look at and to see how well it works and what's good and what's bad and what's indifferent over it. The feedback from that will then be used to shape the final contract. We'll look at feedback from all users, and also we'll try to be more active in terms of going out in the market and talking to people specifically who may want to use it. It is a consultative version. We're not sanctioning it for use. Anyone who does so is really taking a bit of a personal liability on that, rather than saying, well, you've published it, sorry, wait till the final version comes out, which we're hoping is early in 2018. So consultation is welcomed. We'd like as many people as possible to come and tell us what they think and how they feel about the contract. So over to you. Right, that really draws the end of our process here. We've got a time now for any questions that have been raised. Okay, questions then. Has option C been considered for alliancing? We've got one option only.
Yeah, I mean, I've described it as option E, but in fairness, you could also describe it in some ways as option C, because as with option C, we have payment basically on a cost reimbursable basis, yeah, but we overlay that with a performance table. That performance table will contain a financial incentive comparing the budget, total of the prices, for want of a better word, to what used to be the price work done to date. Here is the total price for work done to date, including the client's costs. So you could actually say it's based on option C, it's based on option E. In both, it's somewhere between the two. It is a cost reimbursable contract with an incentive mechanism.
Okay, because an option C contract is really an option E with a performance table built in, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly, but with a one-line performance table or a one-item performance table, which is purely looking at financial performance, prices, your target cost in effect, to the defined cost plus fee. Okay. Here we're something more sophisticated, could I say, where we're saying it's not just that, it's also then other factors, other alliance objectives being measured.
And of course you need to be very careful about how these are all linked together. There is a problem if you get too many objectives, too many performance requirements, interface, mixing together, you can end up having a bit of a confusion as to which ones you're really going for.
Yeah, and say they can drive different behaviours, so it is important to make sure that these things are balanced. It does require, if you like, more effort, more thought by the client when they create the performance table, but that should hopefully achieve better results because it will be very much tailored to suit their particular objectives for the alliance.
Okay, I'm just looking along here. How are consultants included in the pay and gain mechanism of the alliance?
Okay, well, the idea is the performance table will cover all members of the alliance. So you would have the clients in there, you would have contractors, consultants, whether there's suppliers in there, etc. And all of the members of the alliance would feature in that performance table and would each get a share of rewards, possibly suffer a reduction in rewards if performance targets aren't achieved. And it would be for the client initially, when creating the alliance, to work out the sort of distribution of gain, of pain amongst all those different members, but that can be flexed by the alliance or the alliance board post-contract.
Yeah, okay. A question here, a bit of a leading one. What are the real benefits for the client? What does the client get out of this?
Okay.
Takes a lot of risk.
The client does take a lot of risks, a lot of things that maybe they would push off to other members of the supply chain as risks are now being shared or taken by the client, ultimately with it being an option E based contract. But the idea being that overall this should lead to improved performance to the client because the project itself should have improved performance, that they're not paying for man marking, they're not paying for risks that are transferred and don't materialise. They haven't got people wasting effort and energy fighting amongst themselves, fighting against the clients. There should be some ways reduced administration costs, much less potential for claims and disputes because the parties working together. So you see a lot more efficiency in delivery. So there should be some big savings, we hope, in the actual delivery of the project to offset, I think, possibly some perceived additional risk by the client. Because ultimately, if a job runs late, costs more, if major incidents happen, A, they could be recovered through insurance, which is still available through the client's insurances, or B, the client often suffers as a consequence regardless. It's trying to avoid those situations.
Okay, thank you for that. Another question has come up. I'm not sure who this is by. What's happened to the Z clauses? Do you get Z clauses in this contract?
Well, as with any NEC4 contract, there is the opportunity for a client to add Z clauses if they wish. And, very often clients will, and there's no harm in that if it's sort of boilerplate clauses, maybe dealing with internal governance issues, dealing with various even legislative issues they have to have in certain geographies, you can add Z clauses to cover that. Again, people can use Z clauses to amend the standard conditions, but hopefully they won't feel the need to do so. But Z clauses do exist under this contract as under others.
Okay. Or
can exist, I should say, rather than do exist.
I've got a question about the Alliance Manager. Some concern that what the Alliance Manager's got to do is a pretty massive job. Do you think it's going to work okay, or is it too heavy a workload for the Alliance Manager?
Yeah, well, I think you can maybe contrast it with the project manager's function under the ECC, that there's a lot of work there for an individual to do, and the expectation is the Alliance Manager will have the Alliance delivery team supporting them. They can, share responsibilities, they can delegate tasks out, so you would look for them to have possibly a support team around them. But it comes back to the idea of most NEC4 contracts of having a focal point for communication with the board, with the client's rep, so that there are limited channels of communication, albeit the Alliance Manager would look at help and support and have a team working with them to achieve all they have to do.
We've got the Alliance delivery team, presumably they will be working with the manager to help them do this job.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Alliance delivery team, if you like, is the ones actually delivering the project. They're out there organising the teams, doing that kind of activity. The Alliance Manager is this sort of focal point for communications. Yes, a key decision maker, a great responsibility, but they can get support and they should get support in doing that role.
Okay. Just a quick word of apology to all you people out there that I notice I've been using the word he and his too many times. We know we've removed it completely from the contract now, so I must get my mind around to doing it properly. My apologies. There's a question here about regulated industries such as the water industry in the UK. Have we thought about how it might be used in that area?
Well, I think we're hoping that it could be used in that area. We haven't put any specific provisions in to deal with any sort of statutory requirements, any restrictions or requirements placed by the governing bodies or organisations that are responsible for managing those AMP processes or whatever. As with every NEC contract, you do have the scope. You can put in there particular requirements, things that need to be achieved or complied with. Yep. So we think it should be available in those areas, but again, we welcome that feedback and whether there's things we should do, whether there are specific why UK clauses or whatever, or why water industry clauses we need to bring in. But really, it's a base contract which we expect people to take and, using the scope, possibly Z clauses, but more really the scope and how they can operate the performance table, use that to tailor it for different environments.
Okay, so we think it should be used, but we're obviously looking for feedback from industry to say, do you find any difficulties in using it in that way?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Question here, where's this one now? Yeah, who is responsible for quality of work? Which party is responsible for quality of work?
Okay, the Alliance is, I suppose, put simply, responsible for quality in the sense of it's the Alliance who produces the quality plan, who puts together the quality policy statements, and the Alliance Manager is the person that is sort of accepting and running that. I think the Alliance Board ultimately accepts it. So we're saying the Alliance is responsible for quality, but ultimately they have to deliver to the scope. So the quality standards are set in the scope, and the Alliance, primary objective is to deliver what the scope requires. That scope can be developed and changed by the Alliance Board unanimously or by the client instructing a change. But quality should be set out, and then the Alliance is to achieve it. Though the client's representative does have a role in the quality process, they do have an audit or a checking function, and they do get involved in some tests and inspections, and also looking at things like defects.
Yeah, so what about the cost of remedying defects then? That's part of the client cost, is it?
Well, that's part of the cost of the Alliance.
Cost.
So it's an Alliance cost. If there's a defect, the Alliance has to rectify that defect. And again, it's not a case of, well, it's that member of the Alliance's problem or it's the client's problem. It's a problem for the Alliance. The Alliance is delivering a project. The project has a defect. The Alliance corrects it, and that will normally then form part of the Alliance cost and shared through the performance table.
Okay. Who sits on the Alliance Board?
The Alliance Board is made up of a representative of each member of the Alliance.
Every one of them sits on the
board? Every one of them has a representative who sits on the board. All of equal standing, all with, if like, an equal vote in the sense of it's unanimous. So one person disagrees, that person has to be sort of brought round or hopefully brought into line with the rest, because it is this unanimous decision making.
Okay. I've got one commentator here who wants to challenge you. You made a point earlier that probably it's more suitable for the larger projects.
Yeah.
Question mark is why. This person claims they've used it on many small projects. It's ideal for small projects, reduces administration, makes the job simpler. Why should we only use it on large ones?
Okay, well, I mean, that's great feedback, and that's exactly what we want through the consultation process, you know, examples of that, how it can be used. The view has been, rightly or wrongly, that you're going to create, there'll be effort needed to create the alliance, to select the alliance members, to produce the contract data, to set up the systems and processes, this co-location and those sorts of factors, we think lends it to larger projects. It could be it's used for a program of work, and we recognise that. You could create an alliance to do a rolling, rolling program of individual projects under a single contract agreement. So that may well work. But if we're thinking this was a small value one-off project, to create an alliance for that, we think is possibly overkill. But obviously, we look for feedback as to whether there are ways of doing that in a cost-effective way.
Okay, so perhaps you have a comment back on that as to how it works. Question mark about, sorry, I've lost the point now, where was it? Yeah, the question was about the cost reimbursement.
Yeah.
Do the participants get return on profit on what they do?
Okay, I mean, that's a really good question, in fairness, and one, again, we've thought about. The basis of payment is defined cost plus fee, so there is a fee percentage, and the consultative edition allows for individual partners to include their own fees. Okay, but as I said before, the idea is this is not so much a tender process where you submit it out and get the tenders returned. The contract data is formed by the alliance and agreed by the alliance, and our expectation would be that the fee would either be low, possibly it could be zero, or it could be at a relatively low level and primarily allowing the partners to recover overhead.
But no profit on turnover.
But no profit, because we don't want to drive, an increase in turnover to drive behaviours.
Okay.
Though we have left it open, we haven't said it must exclude profit. We thought we'd leave that for when the alliance has been created for the client and the alliance members to have those conversations. Again, if we feel we need to be explicit around that in the documents or how we could achieve that, we welcome feedback.
Okay, another question. Is this designed for construction and services?
It's primarily designed as a construction contract, in that we have, it's a project or a programme of work, we have start dates, we have completion dates. So it's not anticipated to be used for a service, though again, we wait to see what the demand, if there is demand for that type of contract. The presumption has been this will be used to, in a construction arena and to produce an asset. If there is feedback that actually an alliance could be used to undertake some sort of term service arrangement, then it could be considered. But really, very commonly term service provisions are by individual companies on an individual basis as opposed to a consortium doing a term service arrangement. But I don't know, Peter, what do you think to that?
Well, it seems that one of the benefits of the alliance is you can bring in the whole of the supply chain into the same relationship. And I guess that could apply in a term arrangement, a service arrangement, as well as a construction arrangement. I'm not sure about the design of the contract, whether it is being written specifically for construction and it wouldn't work with the service. But in theory, it ought to be possible for a client who wants a service to be provided for a number of years to get together a team of organisations to provide that service, which is rather than having a single supplier who then subcontracts bits of it. So. Yeah. It seems to me it must be possible to go that way.
Yeah, okay, so again, we welcome feedback as whether that's going to be something beneficial, whether it's something we should build into this contract or should have as an option possibly.
Okay, very technical question. Last one we've got to have here is that I don't think we can answer it very easily. How does this all fit with the procurement process under construction regulations, contract regulations?
Yeah, difficult is the simple answer, and again, I think that through the consultation and when it's formally published, guidance will have to look at these sorts of issues. As I've mentioned, the expectation is the alliance will be formed through a negotiation, through the members of the alliance coming together with the client to agree to the content of the alliance and to sign up to it, which maybe does cut across the idea of having this formal competitive process. I'll have to get an expert in that particular field to give advice and comment on it. you possibly could have a competitive process to select, have the basics of the contract in place.
Difficulty, Ian, because of the fact that you've got to have your lines working together. You can't have a forced marriage very easily.
Yeah, and that's it. You know, having a shotgun wedding isn't really going to help the parties post-contract to work together as a team.
We're going to pause there because we're running out of time. Obviously, feedback from procurement specialists in procurement law would be helpful on that as to how you might use it. But I think we can move on now. What we'll say is that there are some more questions which have been raised. We haven't had time to deal with them all. We'll pick those up and we'll provide responses to all the questions in a document that will be circulated later. So, move on, Ian.
Okay, and obviously, you know, anything we can't answer will be form part of the consultation, and some of these questions are food for thought as part of that process. Just to wrap up for today, there's some more webinars coming up shortly. There's one on the 14th of July featuring Matthew Garrett and Rob Gerard, and they'll be talking about the transition from NEC3 to NEC4, how that should take place, what to consider, hopefully showing that it's not going to be too difficult to process. And then there's a further webinar planned that's going to be taking place. It'll come up on my screen. Yeah, covering NEC3 and CCS, so Crown Commercial Services, looking at public sector procurement. And there's 2 sessions there and how that's going to operate, looking at using the contracts in relation to the public sector and for public sector buyers. And then final thing to cover off, last Thursday we had the formal launch of the NEC4 contracts. They're now out there. They're available to buy, hard copy, e-print, etc. If you would like to get hold of copies of those contracts, do contact the NEC at their NEC website, and they'll be happy to help on that.
Good. Well, thank you for that, Ian. We're going to close now. Thank you for your interest, and we do look forward to having your comments on the new Alliance contract. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.